Did knights really fight to the death? Were medieval tournaments just bloody entertainment for bored aristocrats? What if everything you thought you knew about historical competitions was only half the story? Number 8. Political chess moves in disguise. Ever wonder why kings spent fortunes on tournaments? These weren't just expensive parties. They were calculated political maneuvers. In 1520, King Henry VIII of England and King Francis I of France arranged what became known as the Field of Cloth of Gold, a tournament so lavish it nearly bankrupted both treasuries. For 3 weeks, the monarchs showcased their wealth through jousting, wrestling, and archery competitions. Gold-embroidered tents covered fields, fountains flowed with wine, and noblemen paraded in their finest garments. But this wasn't merely royal showing off. Both kings desperately needed to form alliances amid growing tensions with Emperor Charles V. The tournament served as elaborate diplomatic theater, allowing both sides to size each other up while maintaining the appearance of friendship. Similarly, Edward III of England frequently held tournaments during the 100 Years' War to maintain loyalty among his knights and foster military preparedness. When not actively campaigning in France, these events kept his fighting force sharp and unified. Throughout medieval Europe, tournaments functioned as venues for political networking. A 14th-century chronicle describes how marriages, land deals, and military alliances were negotiated between jousting matches. One French duke reportedly secured support for his claim to disputed territories while celebrating a tournament victory. In Renaissance Italy, the Medici family of Florence used tournaments to cement their status. Though technically merchants rather than nobility, they sponsored spectacular competitions featuring the most skilled knights. Through these displays, they associated themselves with aristocratic values and traditions, helping legitimize their political authority. Even the Byzantine Empire, with its sophisticated court culture, recognized tournaments' political value. Emperor Manuel I Comnenos regularly organized competitions blending Western European jousting with traditional Byzantine games to impress foreign ambassadors and demonstrate imperial power. Number 7. Training grounds for war. Did medieval knights really learn to fight by jousting? Absolutely. Tournaments evolved directly from military training exercises. The earliest recorded European tournaments in the 11th century were essentially controlled battlefield simulations called melee competitions. Large groups of knights would divide into teams and clash in open fields, capturing opponents for ransom, just as they would in actual warfare. William Marshall, perhaps history's most famous tournament fighter, parlayed his competition skills directly into battlefield prowess. Rising from obscurity to become Regent of England, Marshall won over 500 tournament contests before applying those same techniques in actual combat during numerous campaigns. Training aspects were incredibly specific. The quinton, a rotating practice target, taught knights precise lance control needed for both tournaments and warfare. Missing or striking incorrectly would result in the counterweight swinging around to knock the rider from his horse, a harsh but effective teaching method. Japanese samurai similarly used tournaments for military preparation. Their horseback archery competitions, yabusame, required riders to hit targets while galloping at full speed, an essential skill in Japanese warfare. Court records show that some samurai were selected for military leadership positions based partly on their tournament performances. The link between tournaments and military readiness was so clear that monarchs sometimes banned competitions when preparing for actual conflicts. King Philip II of France prohibited tournaments before the Third Crusade, concerned they might injure knights needed for the upcoming campaign. Weapon development also reflected this training relationship. Tournament lances evolved with specialized features: coronals, crown-shaped lance tips, and grapers, hand guards that were later adapted for battlefield use. Some historians believe plate armor developments were tested in tournament settings before being deployed in warfare. Ottoman Turkish wrestling competitions served similar military training purposes. The oil wrestling festivals, Yagli Gurs, developed fighters' strength and grappling techniques useful in close combat scenarios. Sultan Mehmed II reportedly selected elite Janissary troops partly based on their wrestling prowess. Number 6. Economic engines for medieval towns. Would you believe a single tournament could transform a town's economy for years? The financial impact of these events was staggering. When Edward III held a tournament at Cheapside in London in 1331, merchants reported selling more goods in 2 weeks than in the previous 3 months combined. Innkeepers, blacksmiths, tailors, and food vendors experienced unprecedented demand. Tax records show some craftsmen earned enough during this single event to purchase property, something normally beyond their means. Towns fiercely competed to host tournaments precisely because of these economic benefits. In 14th century Germany, cities like Nuremberg and Augsburg negotiated special imperial permissions to hold competitions, recognizing their value as commercial opportunities. Surviving account books from Nuremberg show that tournament-related commerce generated enough tax revenue to fund the construction of a new defensive tower. The economic impact extended far beyond the event itself. Tournament preparations often began months in advance. Knights commissioned new armor and equipment, creating work for metalworkers. Aristocrats ordered elaborate clothing, keeping tailors busy. Merchants imported exotic foods and spices to feed distinguished guests. Evidence from 15th century Bruges indicates that tournaments stimulated long-distance trade networks. Merchants arrived with tournament-related goods but stayed to establish permanent trading relationships. Several prominent trading families first established their businesses during tournament seasons before developing ongoing commercial enterprises. For participating knights, tournaments offered their own economic incentives. Prize money could be substantial, but the real value came from ransoms. Defeated opponents would surrender their horses and armor, which could then be returned for payment. William Marshall reportedly supported himself entirely through tournament winnings for over a decade before acquiring lands. Archaeological evidence further confirms the economic significance. Excavations near tournament sites consistently reveal increased coin deposits and luxury items during competition periods. A dig near a 13th century English tournament ground uncovered an unexpected concentration of Mediterranean trade goods, suggesting international merchants recognized these events as prime selling opportunities. Even losing towns benefited. Records from 15th century Burgundy show that when a planned tournament moved to a different location, the original town still experienced economic gains from hosting competitors during practice sessions and pre-tournament festivities. Number 5. Social mobility ladders. Could a commoner become nobility through tournament victories? Sometimes, yes. While medieval society maintained rigid class distinctions, tournaments occasionally provided rare pathways for advancement. The most famous example remains William Marshall, who rose from being a landless knight to become Earl of Pembroke and Regent of England, a trajectory launched by his tournament prowess. Detailed records from 14th century Germany reveal several cases of skilled competitors from modest backgrounds receiving land grants after impressive tournament performances. One Frederick of Augsburg, described as of common birth but uncommon skill, earned enough through competitions to purchase a small estate, eventually receiving minor noble status after serving as a tournament instructor to aristocratic youth. Tournament success created valuable connections. When a lower-ranking knight demonstrated exceptional ability, wealthy patrons often offered positions in their households. Chronicles mention how Count Philip of Flanders recruited multiple knights after observing their tournament performances, providing them with opportunities previously unimaginable. Women also found limited avenues for status advancement through tournaments. Though they didn't compete directly, noblewomen presided as queens of beauty, who awarded prizes and received public honor. For women from lesser noble families, selection for this role could facilitate marriages into more prestigious houses. One 15th century French account describes how a minor nobleman's daughter caught a duke's attention while presenting tournament awards, eventually becoming his wife. In Renaissance Italy, tournaments increasingly showcased individual talent rather than hereditary status. The Medici family sponsored competitions where participants were judged on artistic presentation alongside martial skill. This created opportunities for those with creative abilities but modest backgrounds. Court records mention several individuals who parlayed tournament performances into permanent court positions. Japanese martial arts tournaments similarly offered advancement possibilities. Commoners who excelled in archery or swordsmanship competitions sometimes received samurai status, though this pathway narrowed significantly during the Tokugawa period as classes became more rigidly defined. Tournament success could also rescue fallen nobility. Numerous accounts tell of impoverished knights restoring family fortunes through competition prizes. A 13th-century English chronicle describes how Sir Roger de Leybourne, having lost family lands through political missteps, won enough in tournament prizes to repurchase his estates and regain royal favor. Number 4. Cultural fusion points. Have you ever wondered where East met West in medieval times? Tournaments served as fascinating cultural crossroads. When Richard the Lionheart witnessed Saracen horsemen during the Crusades, he brought their techniques back to European tournaments. Byzantine records describe how mounted games between Western knights and Eastern horsemen during diplomatic meetings led to hybrid competition styles. By the 13th century, tournaments in Sicily and Spain regularly featured both European jousting and Middle Eastern equestrian games. Cultural exchange worked in multiple directions. Ottoman Turkish writings mention how their wrestlers adopted certain techniques after observing European knights grappling during tournament melees. When Byzantine Princess Theophano married Holy Roman Emperor Otto II in the 10th century, she brought Eastern ceremonial elements that became incorporated into German tournament traditions. The Spanish frontier between Christian and Muslim territories became particularly fertile ground for tournament evolution. In cities like Toledo, competitions incorporated elements from both cultures. Muslim riders demonstrated their jarid, javelin games, while Christian knights displayed jousting skills, creating events appreciated by both communities. Tournaments facilitated culinary exchange as well. Banquet records from 14th century tournaments show Middle Eastern spices and cooking techniques appearing in European aristocratic dining. One English chronicle specifically mentions how tournament feasts introduced previously unfamiliar foods that later became fashionable at court. Art historians have documented how tournament decorations and pageantry borrowed heavily from multiple traditions. Heraldic displays combined Norse, Anglo-Saxon, and Near Eastern symbolic elements. Tournament pavilions frequently featured architectural details from Byzantine and Islamic sources, particularly after the Crusades increased exposure to these styles. The Iberian Peninsula's tournaments reflected particularly rich cultural blending. The Spanish jainta riding style used in competitions combined European, North African, and Arab equestrian techniques. Equipment likewise showed fusion knights might wear European armor while riding horses with decorative trappings reflecting Moorish aesthetic preferences. In 15th century Hungary, tournaments served as diplomatic bridges between Western Christianity and the Ottoman Empire. Special competitions were arranged during peace negotiations, with participants from both sides demonstrating their martial traditions while observing those of their counterparts. Number 3. Technological innovation showcases. Did medieval tournaments drive technological progress? The evidence suggests they absolutely did. Tournaments functioned as testing grounds for military innovations. The evolution of armor provides the clearest example. Tournament participation exposed design flaws that could be fatal in actual combat. When a knight was injured due to armor failure during a competition, armorers immediately modified their designs. Surviving armorers' records from 15th century Milan show how rapidly designs evolved following major tournament series. After the 1434 tournaments in Burgundy, Italian master armorers introduced reinforced joints specifically addressing weaknesses observed during competition. Within 2 years, these improvements became standard features in battlefield armor. Metallurgical advances frequently debuted in tournament equipment. The need for lances flexible enough to break safely yet strong enough for effective strikes drove experimentation with laminated wood construction. By the late 15th century, specialized tournament lances featured complex internal structures with different wood types providing varying properties through different sections. Saddle design evolved dramatically through tournament pressures. The high-backed war saddle developed specifically to prevent knights from being unseated during jousting impacts. Museum specimens show how saddle construction incorporated increasingly sophisticated bracing systems, innovations later adopted for cavalry use. Horse breeding programs responded directly to tournament demands. Spanish and Italian breeding records from the 15th century specifically mention selecting horses for tournament characteristics, a combination of strength, speed, and temperament uniquely suited to controlled combat. These breeding programs eventually produced warhorses ideally suited for battlefield conditions. Safety equipment saw particularly rapid development. The frog-mouthed helm, which restricted visibility but protected the face during jousting, represents a specialized design evolution addressing specific tournament risks. Similarly, the Grand Guard, an additional plate protecting the left shoulder and chest, developed entirely within the tournament context before finding limited battlefield application. Tournament infrastructure drove innovation beyond weaponry. Temporary grandstand construction techniques improved to accommodate spectators. Surviving architectural drawings show increasingly sophisticated designs for viewing stands, including early examples of modular construction methods later applied to military and civilian projects. Even seemingly unrelated fields benefited from tournament-driven innovation. Textile development accelerated to meet demands for colorful, durable tournament clothing and horse coverings. Financial record-keeping systems evolved to track complex tournament expenses and prizes. Heraldic identification systems, essential for recognizing competitors, developed increasingly standardized visual communication methods that influenced broader artistic traditions. Number 2, female power and agency. Were medieval tournaments exclusively male affairs? Not quite. Women's roles in these events were more significant and complex than typically portrayed. While women rarely competed directly, they wielded considerable influence as spectators, judges, and patrons. Chronicles from the 12th century describe how ladies' favor could determine tournament outcomes by affecting knights' motivation and performance. The 13th century Romance of the Rose explicitly states that a knight sees himself as twice as strong when his lady watches. Women actively shaped tournament culture through patronage. Eleanor of Aquitaine sponsored numerous competitions, using them to promote her preferred ideas of courtly behavior. Financial records show she personally financed tournaments emphasizing chivalric ideals that elevated women's status within court culture. As tournament judges, women exercised direct authority over male competitors. The position of Queen of Love and Beauty wasn't merely decorative. Historical accounts confirm these women delivered binding judgments on knights' conduct and performance. A 14th-century French tournament record describes how Countess Marie of Champagne disqualified a knight for discourteous behavior despite his technical victory. Women sometimes participated more directly than commonly acknowledged. In 16th-century Germany, records mention women competing in archery competitions alongside men during tournament festivals. Italian Renaissance tournaments occasionally featured women riding in pageants and ceremonial displays demonstrating considerable equestrian skill. Tournaments provided rare public platforms for female expression. Ladies designed and created elaborate favor tokens, scarves, sleeves, or other items given to their chosen champions. These personalized items conveyed specific messages through color, material, and decoration choices. Tournament literature suggests these tokens frequently contained coded communications understood by recipients but not general observers. Women strategically used tournaments for political maneuvering. When Eleanor of Castile attended English tournaments in the 13th century, she deliberately favored knights from regions displaying political resistance to her husband, King Edward I. This subtle diplomacy helped ease tensions without direct royal intervention. Even the physical spaces of tournaments reflected female influence. Archaeological evidence from tournament grounds shows dedicated viewing areas constructed specifically for female spectators, positioned to maximize visibility while maintaining appropriate separation according to social standards. These women's galleries often featured more elaborate decoration than other viewing areas, indicating their cultural importance. Women's clothing at tournaments represented another form of power expression. While subject to general modesty requirements, female tournament attendees used fashion to display family wealth, political affiliations, and personal taste. Detailed descriptions in period sources indicate women's tournament apparel often featured heraldic elements communicating specific dynastic messages to informed observers. Number 1. Ritualized violence control systems. Was medieval society really as brutal as we imagine? Tournaments reveal something surprising: elaborate systems for controlling and channeling violence. Contrary to popular belief, most tournaments weren't blood-soaked free-for-alls. By the 13th century, competitions operated under increasingly sophisticated rules designed to minimize fatalities while maintaining martial challenge. The transformation of the melee general group combat into structured individual jousts represents a deliberate effort to regulate violent impulses. Tournament regulations grew remarkably specific. A 14th century English tournament ordinance specified exact dimensions for weapons, required blunted lance tips, prohibited strikes below certain points on the body, and established mandatory rest periods. Violations resulted in disqualification and public shame. The level of detail suggests serious concern with maintaining control over potentially dangerous activities. Tournaments institutionalized conflict resolution. Historical records document knights settling disagreements through regulated tournament combat rather than potentially destabilizing blood feuds. Courts actively encouraged this approach, recognizing tournaments as preferable alternatives to uncontrolled private warfare that threatened broader social order. Psychological aspects were carefully managed. Tournament heralds employed standardized language when announcing competitions, phrases specifically designed to frame combat as honorable contest rather than genuine hatred. Surviving herald manuals contain detailed instructions for diffusing tensions and ensuring participants understood events as symbolic rather than personally motivated violence. The evolution of specialized tournament armor illustrates this control function. By the 15th century, jousting armor became highly differentiated from battlefield equipment, emphasizing protection over mobility. This specialization physically prevented certain dangerous strikes while channeling combat into predetermined patterns, effectively using equipment designed to enforce behavioral limitations. Religious authorities recognized tournaments' social utility despite periodic attempts at prohibition. Church records show clergy participating in pre-tournament blessing ceremonies that explicitly framed combat within Christian ethical frameworks. These religious rituals emphasized restraint and honorable conduct, integrating potentially disruptive violent energies within established moral systems. Tournaments incorporated elaborate reconciliation rituals. After competitions, participants engaged in formalized feasting and gift exchanges designed to prevent lingering resentments. Chronicles describe how defeated knights were honored at post-tournament banquets, seated in prominent positions, and publicly praised practices specifically intended to neutralize potential humiliation and subsequent revenge-seeking. The audience played a critical regulatory role. Tournament spectators weren't merely passive viewers but active participants in violence management. Historical accounts describe crowds vocally enforcing rules by expressing disapproval when knights employed excessive force. This social pressure created powerful incentives for maintaining appropriate combat limitations. Even tournament training emphasized control. Practice routines documented in knightly handbooks focused extensively on precisely measured strikes and carefully calibrated impacts. Knights spent years learning to deliver powerful but non-lethal blows, developing remarkable physical control that served both tournament and battlefield purposes. Are we misunderstanding historical tournaments by focusing only on their violent aspects? Have we overlooked how these elaborate events actually helped create social stability rather than undermining it? What other historical practices might we be misinterpreting through modern assumptions?